But there really isn't anything new under the sun. We struggle to read the signs. We read the ones that are convenient and we miss the ones that aren't. I do that every time I go for a drive. How many times have you been asked that question, right? Do you know how fast you were going? Oh, it's a mystery to me. Do you know what the speed limit is? Is there a speed limit? I mean, when it's not convenient, we have kind of a convenient memory. And God is moving in the earth in an unprecedented way, in my opinion, and there's tremendous confusion in the church. To be honest, I'm stunned at the capitulation of the church, our reluctance to stand up for biblical worldview and Judeo-Christian values, but I think we've got to pay attention, and I just thought I would start off by watching and listening and thinking with you a bit, and it is related to why Israel matters, I promise, but there's so much happening at an unprecedented pace, and the most predictable constant that I can find in this current post-inaugural season is that those who oppose President Trump will be loud and unrelenting in their opposition. Now, that really isn't new. We've been watching that for a lot of years now, but beyond politics or personal preference, the people who don't agree with him have proven a willingness to tell any lie, fabricate the most remarkable accusations, and then brazenly repeat what they know to be totally false. And I've watched this charade long enough that even though the present version, you pause and you think, well, is that credible? I've got, wait a minute, you have no credibility because you've never repented or apologized or said, oh yeah, by the way, all that other stuff, that wasn't accurate. But the persistence, the volume, and the broad cooperation of the legacy media makes it very difficult to interpret what's truly happening. It isn't simple. I thought maybe just a few facts from history would be helpful. One of the things that these days is drawing intense attention is Doge. And Mr. Musk, I don't know him personally, but as President Trump announced plans to restructure the federal government and remove entrenched activist bureaucrats, the left has reacted with outrage. Right? Many have claimed that such firings are an unprecedented attack on the civil service. But actually, history tells us a very different story. The blueprint for mass firings in the federal government was not drafted by Trump. It was authored by none other than President Bill Clinton. And I can give you just a few of the details. Bill Clinton, as president, took drastic action when he entered office. He fired many federal appointees, and those reporting directly to them. He reached 3 levels deep into the management hierarchy of the federal government. It included upper level, mid-level, lower level managers. Sweeping dismissals were unprecedented at that time in modern history. The stated reason for those actions was to reform government and to make it more efficient. Under the guise of the 1993 Reinventing Government Initiative, Clinton oversaw the termination of almost 380,000 federal employees. The initiative was led by Tennessee's very own Vice President Al Gore, and it was marketed as an effort to cut bureaucratic bloat. Clinton publicized that his administration reduced the government payroll from 2.1 million employees to just about 1.7, almost 1.8, by the end of his term. However, while he claimed to be trimming the size of government, he was in reality expanding it dramatically. Again, what we're watching, at least the part we're watching now, is not new. Rather than actually reducing the government's reach, Clinton tripled its size by shifting millions of jobs to government contractors. The maneuver allowed his administration to hide the true expansion of government within the bureaucracy. And the workforce under his administration grew from 2.1 million to 9.1 million. The restructuring was the foundation of what has become the deep state, an unelected bureaucratic class that exercises significant influence over government operations, often in opposition to elected leaders who challenge the status quo. It's the same entity which Trump is now attempting to confront was a product of Clinton's drastic reshaping of the federal workforce. So it isn't unprecedented. It isn't unheard of. It isn't unknown. It's very much a part of the contemporary practice of government. And our government is bloated. They spend billions of dollars on ideology and worldview. When I was in Jerusalem last summer, as you approached the consulate, the American consulate, the most prominent visual was an enormous pride banner. They wouldn't have allowed you to flown a Christian flag, but they'll take the worldview they're spending billions of our tax dollars for and advocate for their worldview. I think as the debate over federal employment rages on, it's important to remember who first wielded the axe. Trump may be making headlines for firing government employees, but he's merely following in the footsteps of the one who did the master class, Bill Clinton. The Department of Education was in the news this week. God bless that man. It's a cabinet-level department that was founded by President Jimmy Carter in 1980. I think the average American thinks it began in 1776. It's a relatively new insertion into the cabinet-level departments of our government. The expressed goal was to close the gap between students performing at lower levels with the students who were achieving higher. They've been successful. Now everybody's at the lower level. What a colossal failure. Our educational system, by almost every metric, we're spending more money than we've ever spent, and the outcomes are diminished. The department was a formation under President Carter as a response for the help from the teachers' unions during his election. It remains today a stronghold of power for the teachers' unions, and the children have suffered. To the point that in the past year, the president of the teachers' unions said they were the primary authority over the education of the children, not parents. Talk about a bloated imagination of your role. Education must be reimagined. And I would submit to you, especially at the university levels, it has failed. And then Israel. Remember, we're reading signs. I went home this week, and I knew Mr. President Trump was going to have a news conference with the Prime Minister of Israel, but how many of those have we seen? And I was just kind of moderately interested. So the television was on. I wasn't paying much attention. And they did the introductions. And then I heard President Trump say the United States is going to get involved in Gaza. Well, please understand that statement is a major shift in the discussion of Israeli and Mideast peace discussions. But what he did was acknowledge the obvious. What he said is so plain, you have to be so distracted to miss it. He said the pattern of the last 70 years is a failure. No duh. I mean, Israel has been vilified. More than half the motions in the UN deal with the nation of Israel, tiny little Israel. They've been vilified by the nations of the world, far too frequently our own, suggesting that they were the problem in the Middle East. And yet a casual glance at the map, which you're not going to do tonight, but we may. I mean, Lebanon is in tatters, Syria is in tatters, Iraq is a mess, Libya is a mess, Iran is a state sponsor, a global sponsor of terrorism. Israel didn't cause those things. The two-state solution is a failed idea. Something else has to be considered. And you may or may not know that in 2017, then President Barack Obama gave $300 million to the Palestinians for the construction of concrete production facilities. Now, we don't have the work orders that have tunnel printed on them. But it's hard to imagine all that concrete that's gone into the tunnels of Gaza was completely separate from the U.S.'s provision. If that isn't sufficient, this is a matter of record. President Obama, just before leaving office, delivered $50 billion with a B dollars in cash to Iran. They flew it in, palletized. And that's according to Facebook's fact checkers. But get this, without congressional approval. Because he said it wasn't part of a treaty and it didn't require congressional oversight. Just a casual awareness to what's happening demands that Gaza be reimagined. The two-state solution is unacceptable. It has failed. I saw the videos. They abused wives and daughters while their husbands watched. And then they murdered the husbands as the wives and daughters watched. They set babies on fire. You can't repopulate that. They've held hostages for over a year. And when they're released, they're emaciated. It's going to require a different solution. I don't imagine that the U.S. ends up with a territorial commitment in Gaza. But I do believe we have to have the courage to say the two-state solution has failed. Millions of Syrians left Syria because of a Syrian civil war, and they have found homes in Europe and other places of the Middle East. I believe there has to be a more effective solution. Israel's sovereignty over the West Bank of the Jordan River is a biblical step forward. You know, as you're watching and praying, you've got to think. And you have to think beyond the loud noise that is pumped at us. We have leaders who are willing to stand up and say there are two genders that can be identified at birth. That's not only good science, that's good theology.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. Hit the bell for notifications. If you want to, leave a comment.